Two people, same age, same income, same ability to save, and they both need somewhere to live. One of them wants to buy a house. The other wants to keep renting. So we're going to follow them for more than a decade and answer one question: who ends up wealthier? Because most rent versus buy videos start with a list, renting gives you flexibility. Buying builds equity. Renters don't pay for repairs. Homeowners benefit when property values rise. You've heard all of that before, so we're not doing that. Instead, we're going to give these two people the same financial starting line, make them equally serious about building wealth, and let the numbers play out. And importantly, our race doesn't begin when somebody gets a mortgage. It begins years earlier. Because before you can buy a house, you usually have to save enough money to buy one. Let's say both of our people are approaching 30. They earn the same amount. Their normal expenses are roughly the same. They already have a small emergency fund. And after everything else is paid, each of them can put away about $1,500 per month. Person 1 wants a house. So every month, that $1,500 goes toward a future down payment. Person 2 has decided to rent long-term. So instead of building a down payment fund, they invest that same $1,500. Same income, same sacrifice, same amount of money leaving their spending budget every month, just going toward two very different things. We're going to give the future homeowner a 4% return while they're saving for the house. The renter, meanwhile, is investing for the long run, so we'll use a 7% annual return. Not because 7% is guaranteed, it isn't. We're just giving the experiment a reasonable long-term assumption. Now let's give our future homeowner a target. A $400,000 home. 10% down means $40,000. Then we'll assume around $12,000 in buyer closing costs. So before our homeowner gets the keys, they need roughly $52,000. At $1,500 per month with our assumed return, that takes around 33 months, almost 3 years. And this reveals something most rent versus buy comparisons miss. Buying has a financial cost before you ever own the house. For nearly 3 years, our future homeowner has been putting money aside for an asset they don't even own yet. Meanwhile, our renter has been investing. By the time the homeowner reaches roughly $52,000, the renter's portfolio has grown to around $54,000. Not a huge difference, but the renter already has a small head start. And now the traditional rent versus buy comparison begins. Our homeowner buys the $400,000 property. $40,000 becomes home equity. Around $12,000 goes toward closing costs, and the remaining mortgage is $360,000. At a mortgage rate in the mid-6% range, the principal and interest payment alone is a little over $2,300 per month. And this is where one of the biggest mistakes in the rent versus buy debate appears. Someone says, "My mortgage would only be $2,300, and then compares that directly with rent. But the mortgage payment is not the cost of owning the house. Our owner also has property taxes, homeowners insurance, private mortgage insurance because they put less than 20% down, and maintenance. So for our model, let's add roughly $360 per month for property taxes, around $170 for insurance, around $180 for PMI, and roughly $330 per month set aside for maintenance. Now that $2,300 mortgage has become an ownership cost of roughly $3,300 per month. Our renter is paying $2,000. That's a difference of roughly $1,300 in the first year. And now comes the rule that makes this whole comparison fair. The renter does not get to spend that difference. They invest it every month. Because otherwise, we're not comparing rent and invest against buy a home. We're comparing buying a house against renting and spending the savings. That's a completely different experiment, and we'll come back to that later. At first, the renter has several advantages. Their existing portfolio is compounding. They're investing the monthly difference between rent and ownership costs. And their wealth is liquid. If they have $20,000 invested, they can sell part of it. They don't have to move house to access their money. The homeowner has something very different. Leverage. They only put $40,000 down, but they control a $400,000 asset. If that home rises 3% in value during the first year, that's roughly $12,000 of appreciation. Not 3% of their $40,000 down payment, 3% of the entire property. That's why leverage can be so powerful. But leverage works both ways. The house can stagnate, it can fall, and the homeowner still owes the mortgage. For our base case, let's assume the house appreciates by 3% per year. Let's also assume rent rises by 3% per year. And let's keep our renter earning 7% on their investments. Then we let the clock run. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. The homeowner slowly pays down principal. The house appreciates. Their equity grows. But the renter's portfolio is compounding too, and every month they're investing the difference. Then something happens. The water heater dies. A few years later, the furnace needs work. And then the roof starts leaking. Welcome to homeownership. A house isn't just an investment, it's an investment you live inside. And unfortunately, the investment has plumbing, and heating, and air conditioning, and a roof. That's why our maintenance assumption matters. You can't compare rent with the mortgage alone and pretend the rest of the house maintains itself. Now let's jump 10 years forward from the day our homeowner bought. The $400,000 home, appreciating at 3% per year, is now worth roughly $538,000. That sounds great, but the mortgage hasn't disappeared. After 10 years, our homeowner still owes a little over $300,000. That leaves them with roughly $230,000 in home equity. That's real wealth, no question. But now let's look at the renter. They started this phase with their existing investment portfolio. They kept investing the monthly difference. Their rent rose over time. But so did the cost of taxes, insurance, and maintenance for the homeowner. And with our 7% investment assumption, the disciplined renter finishes with roughly $315,000. Under our base assumptions, the renter wins. Not by a few dollars, by something in the neighborhood of $80,000. And remember, the renter's wealth is mostly sitting in a financial portfolio. The homeowner's wealth is mostly sitting inside the house they're living in. Those are both assets, but they're not the same kind of asset. Imagine both people somehow finished with exactly $300,000. The renter has $300,000 in investments. The homeowner has $300,000 in home equity. On a net worth statement, they look equal, but in real life, they're different. The renter can sell $5,000 of investments, or $10,000, or gradually start drawing from the portfolio later in life. The homeowner can't sell 5% of the kitchen. If they want to turn home equity into spendable money, they generally have to sell the house, downsize, or borrow against it. And if they borrow against it, they're creating another debt. That doesn't make home equity bad, far from it. The homeowner gets something extremely valuable in return, a place to live. And eventually, if they hold the property long enough, maybe a paid-off place to live. That's a huge advantage, especially later in life. But it does mean that $300,000 of home equity is not exactly the same thing as $300,000 in liquid investments. And there's another thing. The house can keep going up in value. Your net worth can keep climbing. But if you're still living in it, that higher value isn't putting cash in your pocket every month. You only really get to use that appreciation if you sell, downsize, or borrow against it. Meanwhile, the investment portfolio can eventually become something you actually draw income from. So when we're comparing these two people, we shouldn't only ask, who has the bigger net worth number? We also have to ask, what kind of wealth did they build? So does renting always win? No. And this is where I don't want to give you the standard, it depends. We can do better than that. Let's actually change the numbers. Keep everything else the same, but let the house appreciate faster. At 3% annual appreciation, our renter wins comfortably. At 5%, the homeowner starts catching up very quickly. In fact, at around 5% annual appreciation over the decade, the homeowner can start edging ahead on paper. That's the power of leverage. The homeowner isn't getting appreciation on the down payment, they're getting appreciation on the entire property. But there's another catch. If the homeowner actually wants to cash out and sell, selling costs exist too. So the house usually needs to do even better before the owner has clearly beaten the disciplined renter after all the costs of getting in and getting out. So here's our answer. Renting and investing tends to win when buying is much more expensive than renting, mortgage rates are high, home price appreciation is modest, and the renter consistently invests the difference. Buying becomes much more competitive when you stay for a long time, the price of the home is reasonable relative to rent, financing becomes cheaper, and the property appreciates strongly over time. And the shorter your ownership period, the harder buying becomes. Because buying and selling a house is expensive. If you buy today and move again in 3 years, you don't give appreciation, principal repayment, and time much chance to overcome those costs. Time matters a lot. So under the assumptions we chose for 2026, renting and investing wins. If the assumptions change enough, the answer can change. But that's not us avoiding the question. That's the answer. Until now, our renter has behaved almost perfectly. Every month, they worked out how much cheaper renting was than owning and invested the difference. For years. No excuses, no skipped months, no lifestyle creep, no, I worked hard this month, I deserve it. And this is where we need to meet a third person. Person 3 rents too. Same income, same opportunity to invest, but they see money a little differently. They want to enjoy their life. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Maybe they take one more vacation. Maybe they go out more often. They upgrade the car earlier. They move into the nicer apartment. They order food when they're tired. They buy the phone. None of those things destroys their finances on its own, and none of them makes this person stupid. They're simply making a trade. They're buying more life today with some of the wealth they could have had tomorrow. And once we introduce that person, the rent versus buy argument changes again. Because the homeowner doesn't have to decide every month whether they'll build equity. The mortgage payment arrives, they pay it. Part of that payment slowly becomes ownership. It's forced saving. The disciplined renter doesn't have that mechanism. They have to look at money they could spend and choose not to spend it. Again and again and again. For years. And that might actually be harder psychologically. Because the mortgage doesn't ask, would you rather build equity this month or go on vacation? It just takes the payment. And this is probably the most important part of the whole comparison. There is no version of this story where wealth appears without sacrifice. The homeowner sacrifices before buying. They spend years accumulating the down payment. That's money that could have bought dinners, trips, a newer car, a nicer apartment. Then they finally buy the house and sacrifice liquidity and flexibility. They take responsibility for repairs. They accept the possibility that one random Tuesday, the roof decides it would also like $10,000. The disciplined renter avoids those responsibilities, but they do not avoid sacrifice. They have to take the money ownership would have absorbed and invest it instead, month after month after month, for years. And our third renter chooses something else. They consume more today, and they may genuinely enjoy those years more. That's real. Economics doesn't tell you that enjoying your money is wrong, but there is still a trade-off. Every dollar you earn can become something you consume today or something you own tomorrow. It can't fully become both. If you're asking purely about building wealth, then buying a home is not automatically the better financial decision. Not even close. Under our 2026 assumptions, the disciplined renter finishes ahead. They benefit from lower housing costs, earlier investing, compounding, diversification, and liquidity. But that outcome depends on one enormous condition. They actually invest the difference. If they don't, homeownership can beat them simply because the mortgage forces the homeowner to keep turning income into an asset. And buying has advantages that our final net worth number doesn't fully capture. Housing stability, control over your home, protection from future rent increases once the mortgage is eventually paid off, and the possibility of reaching retirement with no mortgage payment at all. Renting gives you different advantages: mobility, liquidity, diversification, and the ability to invest capital instead of locking so much of it into one property. Neither one is automatically responsible. Neither one is automatically irresponsible. The spreadsheet can tell you which path offers the better economics, but the spreadsheet can't make you follow that path. And maybe that's the real answer. The question isn't only rent or buy. It's, whichever one you choose, what are you going to do with the money?